No Notes. I'm Colby.
And I'm Alex.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. I have a question for you.
And I probably have an answer.
Do you think that we've reached like peak late 1990s, early 2000s influence in like fashion and music?
Good question. Okay, so looking back, 90s fashion was always pretty fucking bad.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to resurrect it.
It was considered like very at the like I think in maybe like the mid 2010s, I remember people looking back at it and saying like that's the last time artists had individuality, because a lot of the artists didn't have like stylists at the time. And so you got to see like the differences in people's personalities. Like I remember Christina Aguilera and Pink and Britney always kind of like looking very different. But now a lot of these artists, like especially when they go to big awards like the Grammys, kind of look very similar because they're all like styled, by other individuals. So you get to see like a little bit more conformity, but with the 90s and 2000s, like it was very individualistic. So I think that's why it was resurrected. But I agree, it doesn't like visually looks very as nice as maybe some of the other eras.
I mean, I think only like two styles really come to mind, and that's this really bad dye job, like
in jeans and
I was saying like denim? Hair, like the bleach blonde job, like the tips, the frosted tips. So like an NSYNC Backstreet Boy kind of style. And then the other side, I think, is somewhere between like a punk to grudge kind of look of like the really baggy, skatery kind of pants and just like distressed looking clothing and like spiked things. Yeah. It just was not a cute look. I think that the reason you're seeing this homogenization, though, really is due to like the expansion of the internet and social media and everything, where like things are just conforming more, and it like creativity does in a way feel like it's tired itself out. Nothing feels fresh.
I will say that I'm really I'm like tired of DJs playing, like it's weird to say, but I'm kind of tired of DJs playing like 1990s 2000s stuff. Like it's they're creating a beat and then the chorus will be, or it's just a remix of a 90s, like a popular 90s 2000 song, and I'm just like, it was nostalgic for a couple of years, but I think I'm ready to put that chapter behind me and like, let's go somewhere else. Let's go somewhere else.
And again, creativity and originality, they seem hard to come by these days. I don't know. I just don't look back fondly, I guess, of that era, either from music or fashion. All of it just seems bad to me.
It's just, I mean, like, I think it was great, but I think it's good when people get a new take on it and like they add something or change it up, or they're playing it with it. But I feel like now it's just kind of a cash cow.
So that's exactly what I was going to raise, is that I think looking back on it, why it seems so painful to me is that it seems very capitalistic. And I say that because styles out of like the 70s and or even earlier 60s, 70s, those were rooted often in like movements, right? Like cultural things that were happening in society that led to people like dressing differently to like sort of identify with one another. Like think about like the hippie movement, things of that nature. Whereas in the 90s, it was all like based on boy band and hot girl groups, like a lot of it to you.
Like the skater movement that we're talking about, right? It's because it's convenient, right? The jeans won't get caught, or they're so big and static that
but most people weren't even skaters. It was like an Avril Lavigne kind of thing.
But it was based on like this utilitarian,
totally,
right? But now it's just kind of like, oh well, I remember this era and I'm just gonna dress like it. So I'm kind of excited to see like this cowboy. I think we've seen a version of it, like it's a combination of the 90s with this like country aesthetic, like trailer trash, like they're calling it like the Ethel Cain sort of look. And I'm like ready for that. I'm ready for this new era, also with like the Beyonce and the Cowboy Carter and all the country's influence. Like I'm excited for us to retire the 90s and early 2000s for good.
I'm with you. All right, should we get into tops and bottoms?
Yeah, tops and bottoms, never going to go out of fashion.
What do you want?
I'll do bottom I'll do bottom, so I'll pick tails.
Okay.
Tails.
All right, so you have bottoms. Do you want me to go first with the top?
Please.
All right. Exciting events happening over the past couple of days. So Trump has been found guilty unanimously by 12 jurors in the state of New York.
34 times.
Yep. 34 charges for, is it Penal Code 175.10, which is falsifying business expenses?
I don't remember what penal code they use in New York, but
I think it's 175.10.
They found him guilty 34 times. I am happy that, something came out of this, but what do you think? Do you think it matters?
So it's challenging for a number of reasons because it feeds into Trump's narrative that he's being targeted and that, the whole system is against him, when in reality, he's just facing the exact same, justice system that anyone else did. The charge is the charge. It's been on the books for a long time. He's being charged in the first degree, which is why he's facing the potential ramifications of that to the length they could be, right? Like he could in theory go to prison, which I don't think he will. But at the end of the day, like, we do have to have a system of law and order.
Yeah.
And Trump did break the law, as 12 jurors that his attorneys screened and approved found him guilty of doing so. So it seems pretty cut and dry to me.
Yeah, I'm hoping that the 10% of so-called independents that are actually swayable in the United States are more likely to vote Biden. Yeah, so I'm hoping that's the effect.
Axios was sharing a poll. Is it from the Morning Consult? I can't remember, but 50% of the independents they polled said that Trump needs to pull out. So, I mean, that's a pretty significant chunk.
50% of the independent?
50% of the independents that they polled want Trump to not run. That doesn't mean the remaining 50% would even vote for him.
Right.
But I think that's a pretty clear indication of where independents are headed. Yeah. That being said, there's obviously a lot of challenging other things that are going to play into this race. Right. But I think race aside, it's really just whether someone broke the law or not. Yeah. And I think what's really frustrating is there's such a significant portion of Trump and the GOP's campaign that is about quote unquote accountability and draining the swamp and law and order. And then once you finally see law and order, it's this witch hunt and it's a political game.
Are you shocked?
No, of course not.
Yeah, I mean, we can we can talk about this forever, but I think the Republican Party has become a football party.
Well,
it's a football team.
They're a propaganda machine.
It doesn't matter there is no set belief. So they can say, oh, law and order is something that we believe in, and then completely change their mind whenever it's against their own, because it's a football team. It's whose team is going to get across the finish line.
Yeah. Well, and in all reality too, the Republicans just do a significantly better job at like the spin game and marketing in general.
And they're also more willing to bend the rules and look the other way than Democrats.
Totally. But they played the game or set the game up such that if he wins something, it's fair and just. And if he loses, it's rigged and it's a witch hunt and all these sort of things. So there really is no real winning here. But that being said, I still think it's astounding that in New York City, 25% of people voted for Trump in 2020. Yeah. Again, his attorneys screened and approved all 12 of these jurors. They were presented with the evidence, and not a single person dissented from that guilty verdict, which, you would think if the evidence was at all like questionable, someone would in theory dissent, and they didn't. So I think we have to go with the fact that whatever was presented was pretty obvious.
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
Correct.
And very similar to Megan Thee Stallion's when she was the victim and testified, right? Like we talked 12 people beyond a reasonable doubt
to get them all to align on
that she was shot at.
Yes, for sure.
Very similar. Yeah, that's the top of the week, and I hope it continues into the political season.
Yeah. What's your bottom?
So my bottom of the week are people moving away. I have now, in the last week, I found out 2 separate couples are leaving San Francisco. And I wish gays would stay in one place more often. Just like, this is your home. Like, ups and downs, peaks and valleys. Like, just stay.
Do I know the second couple? I'm aware of one.
Yeah, you do.
Okay. We can talk about this offline.
But it's just like...
Are they also moving to New York?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
They said the East Coast. I'm assuming it's New York. Like, is there another part of the East Coast that's not New York City?
I feel like gays yo-yo. Like, New York, as much as is as much our home as San Francisco, right? They're both significant places in terms of like gay rights and the history behind our people. So I think people yo-yo too. It's like FOMO in some way. You feel like, could I be having a slightly better experience or life in that place? And then you move there and 3 years later that becomes dry and you're like, oh, maybe I'm reminiscent or missing what I used to have, and then they'll be back.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get into what we're talking about today. So I have to admit, I looked at Queerty a lot. Are you familiar with Queerty?
I've heard of it. I've seen it sometimes in the context of like they are
it's like BuzzFeed but entirely gay.
Yeah, and like they even like focus on like posts of gay people on Instagram, which is like just fascinating. Like they're not celebrities, like they're just gay with a large following, and they'll post about them.
Yeah, it's just like a photo dump of muscle hunks from Instagram.
Goals.
Yeah, but it's still like sometimes kind of fun to read what the queers are saying online. Yeah. And most recently, they have an article titled 10 classic Power Ranger villains that were definitely queer. And this piqued my interest as someone who loved Power Rangers as a kid. And I, like in the article, one of the characters that they highlight that really stuck out to me is Rita Repulsa.
Yeah.
So did you watch Power Rangers?
I did. Loved it. I had no idea that they were like the villains were dubbed. And they like that they just took whatever, I think it was Japanese.
It was a Japanese show.
They took it and kept those scenes in the American version.
Well, it's only when the Power Rangers are in their uniforms and fighting like the creatures and monsters.
But even Rita Repulsa, she's dubbed the entire time.
I don't think, is she?
Yeah.
Okay.
She's dubbed.
But the like Power Rangers themselves are not, obviously.
Yeah, they're American.
Yeah, so Rita Repulsa, I started thinking about this. She is obviously a very queer character. Yeah. She's basically a drag queen.
I want to know who voiced her because that laugh is iconic.
Yeah, she's like a cackling sorceress who's been in prison for 10,000 years and she's just back to like make everyone's life hell.
Yeah. Yeah, like definitely misunderstood. Whatever happened should not have been 10,000 year sentence. That's unjust. So I remember when I was 3 years old, I was living in LA and I was watching Power Rangers with my two older brothers. I remember they asked me what was my favorite Power Rangers, and I said the pink one, Kimberly. And they told me, no, like you can't like the pink one. The pink one is for girls.
Because it's girly, yeah.
Yeah. And then I was like, oh, okay. And they're like, you should like the blue one. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll like the blue one. And from that moment on, I always liked blue, like the blue colored Power Ranger. Blue, everything closed. That became my favorite color because I was told that pink was not for me.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
But I have a funny story for you. So along the same lines, I was obsessed with Power Rangers. Yeah. And also I was a very, no surprise, theatrical and dramatic kid. And I like to put on costumes and perform around the house. And I had every single Power Rangers costume and all the accessories,
including the yellow and pink.
Yes, and the pink one was my favorite one that I would wear. That and the white one. But I would always wear the pink Power Ranger outfit and be like fighting around the house.
Did your parents were they totally okay with you getting the pink one?
Yeah, they didn't seem to really care about that. Yeah. And I think we've talked about that. I was always running that around the house as like the Wicked Witch from the Wizard of Oz. So like they didn't make that kind of connection. Yeah. Obviously, I wasn't making any kind of connection then either. But now looking back at Power Rangers, it was pretty queer, huh?
I think it was. I mean, like it was very queer. A lot of the villains I thought were very theatrical.
Yes, over the top, campy, like kind of awful looking, like silly.
Yeah, and like to a queer boy, like like the men were like very macho and were kind of this like homoerotic sort of image.
Well, and some of the actors ended up being gay in real life, right?
Billy, it's ironic, right? So I liked the blue Power Ranger, and Billy actually turns out to be gay in real life. So yeah, it's weird how it all comes full circle. Later.
That's funny. So, talking about Power Rangers, I think there's a lot of stuff looking back on it now that was obviously pretty queer or queer coded.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, like, what do you think is the earliest show that you saw that now seems pretty clearly queer or a character within it?
Yeah, no. So I remember Sailor Moon being like the show where I would watch and I'd be like, am I supposed to be watching this? Very similar, for the same reason I wasn't allowed to like the Pink Power Ranger. Like, it was about girls transforming. It was like action, but it was very much more geared towards girls.
Well, and it's a very like flowery kind of show. Like the visuals and everything are very girly pop.
And it's like very like, the color scheme that they use is very, it's like pretty to watch. And it like balances like romance with action.
Yes.
But also they had queer characters in it, like full out lesbians. Like there was one of them that in the American version they were cousins, but one of them had like short hair.
Is that Sailor Uranus
and Neptune? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting one that you point this out. I like didn't realize it in the moment, but I remember those characters really sticking out to me when I saw that, and I actually had an immediate sort of like affinity or like
I
felt drawn into them.
Loved them. Like when they added those characters, like I loved Neptune and Uranus. Yes. And I remember specifically like the main character was dancing with the butch one, and she got like the rosy cheeks. Like I'm like, something is off here. Like, why are they both women, and why is like one of them clearly like into? But also it was funny because I would change the channel when my brother when my brothers would come around, because I couldn't
be seen.
I couldn't be seen watching it.
Yeah.
I remember going to school not saying like I liked Sailor Moon. I remember my best friend was like, oh, like Sailor Moon, isn't that like, that's for girls, right? And I was like, yeah, for girls. Like, who would ever watch that? And, like, little did he know that I was like watching it at 4:30 on Toonami, Cartoon Network after school.
I found myself actually very drawn to a lot of the Japanese cartoons, like manga, anime kind of stuff, because there were a lot of very queer characters and all of that. Like very being flamboyant male was like very common.
Very common.
In all of those
hair,
kind of series.
Yeah, long hair.
Yeah.
What about you? Were there any like shows looking back now you're like, okay, this was queer coded?
I think about the earliest ones for me were probably within the like Disney universes. So I watched probably every Disney movie that came out, and some of the early ones that really stand out to me now, like Mulan, like queer coded. And also wasn't her like love interest in that like kind of disappointed when she wasn't a man?
Yeah, it's weird because they're like flirting the entire time, right? Whereas one man, one female, like it was just
like there's definitely some like sexual or like romantic tension there.
Right, when they're supposed to be both men.
Yeah.
So yeah, very homoerotic.
And then there's so many other ones like Hades from Hercules.
Yeah.
Who's just so over the top, flamboyant, dramatic, and sassy.
Comedic. Yeah, very comedic. And like the hair color would change depending on the mood.
And he had his little demon twinks.
Yeah.
I actually think that's where demon twinks comes from.
Yeah. And I remember Ursula,
who's literally based on a drag queen.
Yeah. Bigger. She has like this like exaggerated makeup, and she's also very theatrical and funny. And like, she's trying to get someone's voice.
Yeah. Do you think that this is why there are so many Disney gays? That there's just such a clear connection to these queer characters within Disney?
Yeah. I think what Disney does really, really well is that they take a concept like an ordinary girl, and then they make her special, So I think in a sub context sort of way, it's like us, like we know we're different, but we don't know if it's like for good or for bad.
I think it's kind of the fantasy of it all.
Yeah.
It's being able to see, like, so many of the stories are about people that have like escaped some drab world they were living in to go do something grander, something they were told they couldn't do. Yeah. And I think that's a narrative that queer people really relate to. And I think that's why we feel so drawn to it. This has made me think about villains. I think I found myself very drawn to villains, and especially ones that are more queer coded, like growing up. And like Maleficent is one I think about.
The mistress of all evil.
Yeah, who's kind of mother.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Cheekbones are snatched. That headpiece, so like the horns.
Turns into a dragon.
Yeah. She's serving cunt.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you if you think that there's a reason why we find ourselves so, drawn into villains.
I think that a lot of the villains, especially Disney ones, are always kind of seen as they're villainous because they're misunderstood.
Exactly. I think that's right.
It's, I think we felt very misunderstood being gay as kids, and I think we're like the only ones that gravitated towards this. Like, these people were long, no one liked them, and they're expected to be like, we connect with them.
Yeah, it's like part of the reason or underlying cause of their evilness was because they were cast out and not treated well by others. And I think that's, again, just something that it's really easy to connect to.
Yeah, and like a lot of them are really funny.
And Disney also would, and other cartoons that, I felt would make the villain really interesting fashion-wise and design-wise. Yeah, one example that comes to mind outside the Disney universe is you watched Powerpuff Girls.
Yes.
Love Powerpuff Girls. Yeah. Who also that makes me think was kind of similar to Sailor Moon in a way, where it felt like, oh, this feels really girly and flowery. Should I be watching?
3 girls, right? It's about 3 girls, sugar spice and everything nice.
Right.
And like the colors were also very girly, right?
Buttercup was the green one, right?
Yep.
Also very queer coded.
Yeah, butch lesbian, right? And
yeah, very butch lesbian, and also wasn't into boys. I think pretty explicitly, like was like they're yucky or something like that.
I do remember the other girls just being more attracted to guys, and then we had like this butch kind of one.
Yeah, but I wanted to talk about the villain, him. Yeah, him has to be one of the queerest characters I have ever seen in like a children's cartoon. I don't even know if androgynous is the right word. He's a pretty effeminate. Is he a lobster?
It's all very unclear. Like his voice was both feminine and masculine at the same time.
But he's like a lobster devil kind of thing.
No idea. I think
but he's got like kind of high heels sort of design, and he wears a tutu.
Makeup on. Yeah, it looks like the devil. I remember like it was spooky. It was kind of spooky.
It was spooky. And also his whole existence is based around like just torturing these 3 little girls.
Yeah. Like I want to understand like what was the character design, like who thought of that, who approved it, why was that allowed?
I feel like also has to be based on the drag queen.
Yeah.
What do you think makes a character queer coded? Because in a lot of these shows, especially late 90s, they definitely weren't being explicitly described as gay or queer. And I mean, other than him and Powerpuff Girls, I mean, it was very loosely alluded to. So why do you think, like looking back now, these characters feel so like queer? What is it about them?
Lack of like a love interest.
As in, like they're like if they're female, they don't have like a male partner or something like that.
Usually their story just revolves around like being like, I'm thinking of Dumbledore, right? Like sort of where they're queer, but they are never like, they have no love interest. And I feel like that was the closest thing in like the 90s and 2000s that you could probably get to like a queer character, especially like on a television show or a cartoon show for kids, is just to have like a lack of love interest.
Yeah, I think or just like non-traditional relationships in general. Another Disney one, The Lion King, that comes to mind, like Timon and Pumbaa.
Yeah, right. I mean, 2 animals that live together forever.
Yeah, they had their Hakuna Matata relationship. And I mean,
they introduce a third, which is very classic queer, right? After 10 years.
After 10 years, they find their third.
Yeah, they find their third or get a animal.
I think some other things that, are like tools or ways that they like make characters sort of queer is like gender nonconformity, which we've talked about that, like him, again, great example. But just characters that were like outwardly sort of campy, flamboyant. They didn't fit traditional roles. And I think
outcasted, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking of X-Men, the original.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like X-Men at any point, right, is always going to be queer, coming out, being closeted, being a mutant, being different.
Being hated for what you are.
Exactly.
It's kind of allegorical.
Yeah. Like X-Men, I think, is just such a good example because it can apply not only to queerness, but a lot of like the segregation movement, right? It's like about a lot of the themes are separate, not equal sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I think X-Men is like one of the best examples that we have.
Yeah. And then I think you hinted at or stated a point earlier that was really good about just being misunderstood. Cause again, I think that's just such a theme that it's easiest to relate to. Cause when you're really young, like you may not have had like the sort of sexual or even romantic awakening kind of yet, but you do sort of, you feel that friction in day-to-day society where you don't necessarily feel like you relate to people around you. And so I think that's what makes some of these characters work so well and why they're so like memorable and we get attached to them, like the Disney gays, is because it's like you feel like there's someone there now that you kind of feels a little bit more like you.
Yeah. Yeah. Growing up, did you, were you ever like attracted to characters on television, either cartoon or real life?
I have an embarrassing one.
Okay.
I kind of thought Johnny Bravo was hot.
I thought Johnny Bravo was hot as well. Like he would constantly take off his shirt.
Why was his chest so big?
I don't know. He's the original himbo.
He was the original himbo.
Okay. What was that show about? I remember him taking off his shirt and going, "Hey, mama." But I don't remember.
Was the whole show just him hitting on ladies?
I think it was, I think the entire point was for him to go after a girl and like the shenanigans he would get into. But do not quote me.
That sounds right. But honestly, I think I might have been in such a trance from his big chest.
Yeah.
And I love big tits.
Oh, I know. I find you every time on my chest.
That I honestly think that's why we don't remember the plot.
Same thing with Samurai Jack.
Oh,
same reason,
my
always
God.
shirtless.
And honestly, great
chest.
Show. There was a villain in that.
Two very different. Great show. That's what I meant to say.
He did have a great chest. I remember there were like some training scenes.
Yeah, he was constantly in his underwear. And I remember the cartoon, his nipples would be just like a 6.
I remember this now. This is now making me realize that a lot of my tit attraction is deeply rooted in these cartoons.
Cartoon Network, I'm telling you,
really did a number on me.
They have a lot of queer coded characters. I mean, like, also did Samurai Jack have a love interest? No.
Also, don't remember.
I have no idea.
I feel like any of these cartoons with like the more like attractive male role. I don't remember the storyline. I just remember the character.
I was there for the tits. That's it.
Similar along the lines of Sailor Moon that you talked about. And we've talked about this a little bit before too. I loved Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah.
If I had to look back and go, this show definitely made me gay, it would be Dragon Ball Z.
Dragon Ball Z is so funny to me because I remember there would be like 10 episodes of one fight.
Yes.
Like I remember it was like there was probably multiple seasons with tournaments, but I remember there'd be like the tournament portion would cover like at least a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
It was just like, how did they create an entire show of a fight?
But the whole concept that these guys just have to like keep getting stronger in order to defeat these like bigger aliens, and it's like basically them just getting like more roided.
Should we be Dragon Ball Z for Halloween?
I don't think I'm big enough.
Oh, okay.
I could go as like,
I think I am.
I don't even know if you have big enough arms.
Let's see what the crowd has to say.
Dragon Ball Z is one that sticks out to me in particular because it's something that a lot of people were into.
Yeah.
And I felt like it was this way that I can
relate to straight people.
Not just
straight
that,
guys.
but you could be talking to other boys your age.
Yeah.
I'd be really excited and pumped about the show without it making it seeming gay, right? I mean, at that age, I didn't realize that I was gay. Now looking back, I realized I was very drawn to that show because, again, there's a bunch of big dudes getting more muscly and angry and letting it out on each other.
Also, maybe the source of all of our problems, Dragon Ball Z.
So I think that there was something really nice about something like that you could relate to other boys and in a different way, but they didn't realize it was different. One of the shows that also stands out to me a lot, SpongeBob.
Yeah, very gay. Both Patrick and SpongeBob, they would play the male and female roles.
I honestly, looking back at it, I think that basically every character in that show was queer in their own way. Yeah. So you have like SpongeBob and Patrick, an adult sponge that lives with his snail, Patrick the starfish. They spend a lot of time together. There's even an episode where they like raise a clam
That's
together.
the episode I was thinking of because I remember a fish and it had like a thought bubble. It's like starfish plus sponge equal clam.
So that's actually an episode that really stuck out to me, that I was like, oh, this is kind of like two dads together.
Yeah.
But you have Sandy the squirrel, who's
lesbian,
very butch.
Squidward, which we all know an old gay like that.
Oh my God, Squidward
would be hanging out at Twin Peaks.
I actually think I am Squidward. Squidward
should be hanging out at Twin Peaks.
This like basically middle-aged squid that's bitter.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to hang out with anyone. His happiness comes from being on his own at home.
Yeah. Like he would play music all the time, but he was terrible at it. So it reminds me of you with your fashion sense.
And then like Mr. Krabs, was he divorced or?
Yeah, he was. Well, it's weird because his daughter wasn't his species.
Right. So adopted, probably. Right. So single-ish dad. Oh. But then the other character that...
Plankton.
Plankton also... and again, he was just sort of like misunderstood.
Everyone's gay. And then also, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy.
Old daddy and his like twink.
Oh my God. And you guys kind of look alike too.
And the final one, the lobster. The roided lobster at the beach.
Hot. Was his name Larry?
I think it was Larry.
Larry was hot. Were you ever drawn to any like strong women in television shows?
Definitely in like cartoons and stuff. I talked about how I think I always related to villains.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of them were very strong female characters, but one cartoon in particular that sticks out to me, Kim Possible.
Oh yes.
Loved Kim Possible. And honestly, like kind of a butch female character.
Yeah. And Shigo as well. The villain.
Yeah, who's definitely queer coded. But similarly to you, like I liked Sailor Moon, I liked Powerpuff Girls, I liked the narrative of these girls being like tough and being their own heroes. So I think I definitely related to that. What about you?
Yeah, so a lot of come to mind. So Veronica Mars, Kristen Bell, high schooler. Like she's like very funny, very witty, and that show had so many actors that would go on to be really famous, like Jessica Chastain, Bryce Dallas, Amanda Seyfried. Like they would all, like a lot of smaller actors went on that show. Paris Hilton was on that randomly, as was like Kristen Cavallari, who played a lesbian in that show, who I thought it was like very revolutionary.
Now that you're bringing up these like sort of strong female characters, I'm now thinking about an even older show that we haven't discussed.
What is it?
Velma and Scooby-Doo.
Yeah. Velma and Daphne.
Yeah.
Really.
I mean, both strong female characters, but I'm saying like Velma is very queer coded. And in contrast to Daphne, who I think is more meant to play that kind of like
damsel in distress,
maybe a little bit of like a bimbo kind of role. And Velma's like the exact opposite of that. Her outfit like is very conservative. She's like covered up with a turtleneck, right? But Velma is such a queer character and one that I think we love a lot.
And I think she is getting her due. Like I feel like a lot of people recognize that she was queer coded, and people are playing homage to her dressing up like her.
Yeah.
So I feel like she had her moment. I think it's being recognized. There was also, I loved Claire and Kate from Lizzie McGuire.
Yes.
Villains, middle schoolers, but like they would be like fashionable. They
definitely scissored.
Oh, all the time. They probably smelled like fish walking down the hall. Also really funny. They'd always have great one-liners like, don't be an outfit repeater.
Also, wasn't there like hatred for Hillary, basically some sort of like lesbianic jealousy too?
Yeah, they didn't really explain why they didn't like her.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It feels kind of like
they wanted her to be the third. Claire and Kate had been together for so long that they wanted a third, and Lizzie said no.
Yeah.
Also, that show is iconic because like they didn't have a lot of Mexican characters around the time. I think we've talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
But Miranda, also kind of butch, right? Like she probably wanted to, maybe she was experimenting with Lizzie.
Yeah. We talked about characters that are more subtly queer or queer coded.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's important that characters be more explicitly queer now, or is there any value in the more like in subtlety, I guess?
I think that in the 90s and early 2000s, I think being like subtle about your character was fine because that's all you kind of could get away with. And I think like, especially when we talk about visibility, like you should take what you can get.
Yeah.
But now when it's a lot more accepted, especially with like trans characters and queer characters, I think it's not enough to be subtle. Like it should be explicit now. And we looked at an article prior to recording this where 36% of characters from I think this year aren't going to be coming back next year because either the show's getting canceled or the show's just ending. So, and we've also talked about the politics in the United States right now. It's like, it seems to not be heading in the right direction. So I think now more than ever, we should be having explicit gay characters and television, especially for those kids that don't really know if they're queer or not. And they're not getting like the education from their parents, or they're not seeing people like them in real life. Like television shows are so important for kids to relate to.
Yeah. I think there's a bit of a balancing act. Like I totally agree with you that having really explicitly queer characters is important. I think there's been a number of them where there's been like queer family shown, like a kid being raised by two moms, two dads. And I think that's really important. But I think about some of the like more recent cartoons or like things that Disney have put out. So like Disney put out Strange World. Have you seen that?
No.
Well, the main character in it, Ethan, he has a boyfriend and ends up like telling his parents like later on in the movie. And then there was it's a Disney Channel movie, or is it? No. So I think it was supposed to go to theaters. I don't know if it ended up, it was like over the pandemic timing, but I also think Disney kind of tried to like suppress it a bit because they were worried about the backlash in it. But there's another film, maybe like 12, 15-ish years ago that I think we've watched before, Paranorman.
Yeah.
Where then at the end, it's revealed that the like dorky little kid's big muscly sort of Johnny Bravo kind of brother is gay. So there's definitely been more explicit characters, but the reason I think that there should be a bit of a balance is I think it can be a box of its own, right? Like if you're saying like this is like a gay character or a lesbian character to maybe a kid that still hasn't quite figured everything out, doesn't understand the nuance, that may in itself feel less relatable. So I think there is something nice about these characters that are very loosely or not defined at all.
So you're saying more people should go back in the closet?
not at all.
It's okay. Everyone has an opinion.
I think there's value in both, is what I'm saying. Like just because everything is so fluid now that I think it's nice to have a lot of versatility. And honestly, the backlash stuff is very real. I think it's becoming hard to be so explicit, which doesn't mean we should back down from it at all. Right?
Do you think that there is, I remember like when characters start becoming queer, like a lot of the straight viewers stop watching it. Like people just start saying like, oh, this is like, there's too much. Like, do you think there's any truth in that?
Probably. And that's what I'm saying, that there's value, I think, in the subtlety because it's less alienating. It's relatable to a broader group of people. If you grew up in these areas where there's just like no one really like you, I think anything that's sort of like queer coded, whether explicitly stated or not, is like some sort of like mirror at the end of the day where you finally like see something that you're like, oh, I see myself in this character. Yeah.
No, I agree. To wrap this up, I never felt like I could be Cyclops as a kid. Right?
Because you had the two eyes.
I had two eyes.
I can help you remove one of them if you want.
No, I had 4 originally, so I think I'm down to 2. I want to keep those 2. But like, you know, I never felt like I could play any of the X-Men because none of them were really brown. But like I think that TV shows should be they should have like at least a couple of characters that are very specific, but some person can relate to them. I think that's when TV shows do best, is when they are very specific about their characters and that they do represent real life, because it does help us out. Like it helps us see ourselves in these television shows, us to be able to like see someone and be like, you know, maybe I am like that person.
Yeah. And, you can realize, I don't know, 10 or 15 years later that your obsession with Pecs is all due to Disney programming.
Johnny Bravo.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll talk to you next week.
See ya.
See ya. Hey, it's Colby and Alex here. Thank you for listening to No Notes.
If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts and share with your friends.
You can also follow us on Instagram at No Notes Pod, one word, where you'll find updates on new episodes and see more into our lives and the stories that we share with you on the show.
Your support means the world to us. Until next time, keep it real and keep it queer.